What if your government watched an entire generation of children get their brains quietly destroyed and chose deliberately to say nothing? In Picher, Oklahoma, that is exactly what happened. What do you call a company that extracts billions of dollars from beneath a town's streets, leaves behind mountains of toxic waste 200 feet tall, and faces not a single criminal charge? America calls it legal. Welcome to the world of dark ledger. In 1913, in the far northeastern corner of Oklahoma, on land belonging to a member of the Quapaw Nation named Harry Crawfish, a discovery was made beneath the red soil that would, within a single decade, transform a quiet stretch of Native American land into one of the most industrially explosive boom towns in all of American history. Lead, zinc, buried in extraordinary concentrations, just deep enough to require men, and just valuable enough to make those men expendable. By the roaring peak of the 1920s, the town of Picher, Oklahoma, had swelled to a population of nearly 20,000 souls, its main street crowded with commerce, its churches full on Sundays, its schools overflowing with the children of miners who believed, genuinely believed, that they were building something permanent. Beneath those streets, more than 14,000 men descended each morning into a vast underground labyrinth of tunnels, drilling and blasting in total darkness, extracting the minerals that were quietly making Picher one of the most strategically critical locations in the entire United States. When World War I tore through Europe, Picher did not merely contribute to the Allied effort, it sustained it. The Picher mining field supplied more than 50% of the zinc and 45% of the lead consumed by the entire United States military throughout that conflict, providing the raw material for bullets, artillery shells, and shrapnel casings fired on battlefields thousands of miles away from the Oklahoma flatlands where they were born. Then World War II arrived, and Picher reached even deeper into the earth. An estimated 50% of all American bullets and bombshells used across every theater of that global war were manufactured from metals pulled out of the ground beneath this single small town in northeastern Oklahoma. From the beaches of Normandy on June 6, 1944, to the volcanic soil of Iwo Jima, American soldiers fired rounds into history that existed only because of Picher. Remember that. Because the story of what America gave back to Picher in return is one of the most quietly catastrophic acts of institutional betrayal this country has ever produced. So what was it that the mining companies left behind in Picher when they finally packed up and left in 1967 that would go on to silently destroy a generation of children and set the stage for something that had never happened in recorded American history? Mining is not a clean industry, and the corporations that extracted billions of dollars worth of minerals from beneath Picher's streets had absolutely no intention of cleaning up after themselves. For every pound of lead and zinc removed from the Oklahoma earth, enormous volumes of crushed, chemically contaminated waste rock were hauled to the surface and simply left there. The industry had a name for it. They called it chat. What it actually was some of the most concentrated toxic material ever deposited on residential land in American history, loaded with lead, cadmium, zinc oxide, and arsenic in levels that modern environmental science classifies as acutely hazardous to human health at any level of sustained contact. And for decades, those chat piles grew and grew and grew until they rose 200 feet above the flat Oklahoma landscape, the height of a 20-story building, stretching across virtually every corner of the town, in vast, gray, poisoned mountain ranges that sat in full view of every home, every school, every playground in Picher. Nobody told the families of Picher what those mountains were made of. Not in the 1920s, not in the 1940s, not even in the 1960s. And so, for generations, children rode their bicycles up and down the slopes of those piles on summer afternoons. Families spread blankets across the gray dust for weekend picnics. And some parents, loving parents, attentive parents, actually scooped that silver-gray chat dust into their children's backyard sandboxes. Because it looked clean. Because no one had ever told them otherwise. In 1967, with the most profitable veins exhausted, the mining companies shut off the industrial pumps that had been keeping the underground mine shafts dry, and the 14,000 abandoned tunnels beneath Picher began to slowly fill with contaminated groundwater laced with heavy metals and sulfuric acid. By the late 1970s, that toxic water had migrated upward through the soil and begun draining directly into the local tar creek, which turned orange, then a deep, unnatural red, as fish died by the thousands, and the waterway became chemically incompatible with life. The ground above those 14,000 hollow tunnels grew dangerously unstable, and sinkholes began opening without warning in streets, in front yards, and directly beneath the foundations of homes that families were still living in. In 1983, the Environmental Protection Agency formally designated the area as the Tar Creek Superfund site, one of the very first and most severely contaminated designations in the history of the national program. It was, at minimum, an acknowledgement that the damage was undeniable. What it was not was anywhere near enough. In 1994, a landmark public health study conducted on the children still living in Picher returned results so alarming that federal officials struggled to explain how the situation had been permitted to continue for so long. 34% of all children tested were found to carry blood lead concentrations above the federal danger threshold, a level already calibrated conservatively low to account for the most vulnerable developing neurological systems. Lead poisoning at those concentrations does not produce a temporary illness. It does not resolve with rest or medication. It causes irreversible damage to the developing brain, permanently reducing cognitive capacity, triggering learning disabilities, compressing IQ potential, and producing a cascade of behavioral and developmental consequences that follow a child through every stage of their life. The children of Picher had been robbed of futures they never knew they were supposed to have. In 2006, an Army Corps of Engineers structural assessment completed the picture with clinical finality, confirming that 86% of Picher's buildings, including the town's elementary school, were structurally compromised and subject to sudden collapse. The federal government reached the only conclusion that remained. Picher could not be saved. It could only be emptied. A mandatory buyout program was launched, and street by street, family by family, the town that had once housed 20,000 people began to quietly dissolve. By the spring of 2008, Picher had been reduced to a few hundred holdouts, people who couldn't yet bring themselves to take the government's check and drive away from the only place they had ever called home. Surrounded by condemned buildings, toxic mountains, and ground that could swallow a house without warning. What those final residents could not have known was that the atmosphere above northeastern Oklahoma had been building towards something for days, something that would not merely end Picher, but revealed to the entire world exactly what had been done to it. Saturday, May 10th, 2008. Meteorologists at the NOAA Storm Prediction Center had been monitoring a powerful weather system pushing east across the Great Plains throughout the morning, watching as the atmospheric conditions over northeastern Oklahoma aligned into a configuration that experienced forecasters recognize immediately as deeply dangerous. Exceptional convective instability combining with violent wind shear, the two core ingredients that allow thunderstorms not merely to grow, but to rotate. By early afternoon, supercell thunderstorms were firing across northeastern Oklahoma, and one storm in particular began organizing with a speed and structural coherence that drew every available eye in the forecast office. It developed a massive rotating base, a textbook mesocyclone, as it accelerated eastward across Craig County, moving faster than the models had anticipated, tracking directly toward Ottawa County, directly toward the toxic ruins of Picher, Oklahoma. At 5:20 p.m. Central Daylight Time, a trained weather spotter positioned in the town of Welch, just west of Picher, visually confirmed a developing circulation and immediately called it in to the National Weather Service. Tornado sirens began to wail across the near-empty streets of Picher within minutes. The warning gave the town's remaining residents